There is a particular kind of silence that follows a man who has nothing left to lose. Not the peaceful silence of a Sunday morning or the comfortable quiet of a life well settled. This is the silence of an empty house in Boise, Idaho, where a dog no longer sleeps by the door, where a truck no longer sits in the driveway, where a savings account that took 30 years to build has been reduced to nothing wired overseas, piece by piece, to a woman who was never real. This is the story of Dale Hutchkins. 61 years old, retired heavy equipment operator, a man who spent 4 decades doing honest, backbreaking work and had very little to show for it except a rented house, a loyal dog named Rusty, and a television he left on all night because the silence was too loud to sleep through. Dale was not a naive man. He was not a romantic by nature. He had never in his life sent flowers or written a love letter or told another person that they made the world feel different. He was the kind of man who fixed things with his hands and kept his feelings to himself. The kind of man who assumed love was something other people were better at. And then, on a sleepless night in front of a laptop screen, a woman named Angel Reyes found him. What happened next across 8 months of daily messages, voice notes, late-night calls, and wire transfers would cost Dale everything he had built and everything he had hoped for. It would cost him his truck, his savings, his dog, and the quiet dignity of a man who believed, for the first time in 20 years, that someone was waiting for him. This is not a story about a foolish man. This is a story about a lonely one. And in the hands of the people who target men exactly like Dale, loneliness is the most expensive thing in the world. I never thought of myself as lonely. That's the first thing you need to understand about me. Loneliness was something that happened to other people, people who didn't know how to be alone, people who needed constant noise and company and reassurance. I wasn't like that. I was self-sufficient, always had been. I grew up in a household where you didn't talk about what you felt. You just got on with things. You worked. You fixed what was broken. You didn't complain. My first marriage lasted 9 years. Karen was a good woman. She said I was emotionally unavailable, that living with me was like living with a piece of furniture that occasionally asked what was for dinner. She wasn't wrong. I just didn't know how to be any different. My second marriage lasted 6 years. Deborah was more patient, but eventually, she ran out of patience too. By 50, I had been divorced twice, estranged from both my adult sons, and thoroughly convinced that relationships were something I wasn't built for. So I made my peace with solitude. I retired from heavy equipment operation at 58 bad knees, a worn rotator cuff, and 30 years of concrete and diesel in my lungs. I picked up part-time hours at a hardware store in Boise because the alternative was sitting alone in a house with nothing to do, and that was somehow worse than working. I got a dog, Rusty, a tan and white mutt I picked up from a county shelter. He was the best relationship I'd had in years, and I mean that without irony. I discovered Facebook at 58 because a coworker set it up on my phone and showed me how it worked. I wasn't interested in posting photos of my meals or sharing political arguments. What I found myself doing, slowly and almost accidentally, was watching YouTube videos about places I had never been. Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, the Philippines. I had never left the United States, not once. 40 years of working and raising children who eventually stopped calling meant that the concept of travel had always felt like something for wealthier people, more adventurous people, people whose lives had room in them for that kind of thing. But on those sleepless nights when Rusty was already snoring and the television felt like too much noise, I would find myself watching videos of Manila sunsets and Boracay beaches, and something quiet and aching would open up in my chest. I joined a Facebook group called Friends of the Philippines Travel and Culture. I didn't plan to do anything with it. I just wanted to look, to imagine. That was my first mistake. Not because the group itself was dangerous, but because I walked into it carrying everything a scammer looks for. I was retired, moderately financially stable, isolated, romantically unsuccessful, and I had never in my life felt truly seen by another person. I was, in every technical sense, a perfect target. I just didn't know it yet. If you've been enjoying the stories I tell, please consider hitting the subscribe button. Your support is crucial for the growth of this channel and helps me dedicate time to making these videos despite my commitment to a full-time job. Thank you for being here. The friend request came on a Wednesday evening in early autumn. I remember because Rusty had just had his vaccinations that afternoon and was sleeping off the drowsiness beside my chair, and I was scrolling through the Philippines group without much intention, reading other people's travel stories. Her name was Angel Reyes. Her profile picture showed a young Filipino woman, mid-20s, dark eyes. The kind of smile that looked like it cost her nothing, natural and warm and completely unguarded. She wasn't posing. She was sitting at what looked like a small kitchen table, a cup of something warm in front of her, laughing at something off camera. She looked, in a word, real. I looked at her profile before accepting. There were photos going back several years, family gatherings, a beach trip with what appeared to be cousins, a photo in a mall uniform that looked like a legitimate job. Nothing that screamed performance or fabrication. Just an ordinary young Filipino woman living an ordinary Filipino life. Her opening message arrived 20 minutes after I accepted. "You seem like a very kind man. Not many Americans take interest in our culture." I stared at it for longer than I should have. I almost didn't respond. Every instinct that had kept me emotionally guarded for 60 years told me to close the app and go to bed. But another part of me, the part that had been quietly starving for decades, typed back, "I've been watching a lot of videos about the Philippines. Beautiful country." Within the hour we were talking. Not just exchanging pleasantries, but actually talking about the Philippines, about Boise, about what I did for work, about how I'd ended up alone in a rented house, with a dog and a part-time hardware job. She asked questions that nobody asked me. She wanted to know what heavy equipment operation actually felt like, whether it was satisfying, whether I was proud of what I'd built. She asked about Rusty. She called him the most important man in your life, and made me laugh out loud for the first time in longer than I could remember. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that on the other side of that screen, in a cramped apartment in the Tondo district of Manila, a 26-year-old woman named Marisol Taguinod was working from a script. Her handler, a woman known in the neighborhood as 8 Chris, had developed a detailed playbook for men exactly like me. Older, Western, emotionally starved, active in Philippines-related online communities. Marisol's role was the romantic interest. The photos she used belonged to a nursing student from Cebu whose defunct Instagram account had been mined for its authenticity. Everything the casual poses, the family moments, the natural smile was someone else's life, repackaged as bait. Marisol was not without intelligence. She was not without conscience, either. She had grown up in poverty so grinding that the concept of a fair choice had never really applied to her. By 26, she had worked a call center, a factory floor, and a mall promotion booth, and none of it had touched the debt her brother owed to people who didn't accept late payments. When 8 Chris offered her a 30% cut of whatever she extracted, she understood exactly what she was agreeing to. She was very, very good at it. By the end of that first week, Angel was sending me voice messages, little recordings. A minute or two long, her voice light and warm with a musical Filipino accent, telling me about her day, asking about mine. She said she worked an early morning shift so she could be awake during my Idaho evenings. She asked about Rusty every single day, by name, as though his well-being genuinely mattered to her. She called me my Americano. It was a small thing, a nickname. But nobody had given me a nickname in 30 years, and I'm not ashamed to tell you that it reached something in me I had thought was dead. By the end of the second month, Angel and I were speaking every day without exception. The conversations had evolved from friendly curiosity into something that felt, to me at least, genuinely intimate. She told me things, or things she framed as confessions, that she had been hurt before by Filipino men who saw women as obligations rather than people, that she had learned not to expect tenderness, that she had stopped believing a man could be both strong and gentle until she met me. She said that last part quietly, as if she were embarrassed by it, as if the admission cost her something. And that cost, that apparent vulnerability, was what made it land so hard. I found myself thinking about her during the day. At the hardware store, between customers, I would check my phone for messages. I would compose responses in my head during the drive home. I told my coworker, Terry, about her in the most careful, understated way I could manage. Just that I'd been talking to a woman online, from the Philippines, that she seemed like a good person. Terry raised an eyebrow and said nothing. I chose to read his silence as neutral. What Angel was doing during these weeks, what Marisol was doing, was constructing something that behavioral psychologists call an emotional anchor. Each conversation was designed to make me feel more known, more valued, more understood than I had felt in any previous relationship. She remembered every detail I shared and reflected it back to me. She noted that I preferred practical problem solving over emotional processing, and she adapted her approach accordingly, framing her affection in terms I recognized: reliability, consistency, showing up every single day. She made me feel chosen, not in a grand, overwhelming way, but in the quiet, daily, accumulative way that actually changes a person. The way that makes a 61-year-old man in Idaho start looking up Philippine retirement visa requirements at 11 o'clock on a weeknight. In the third month, she began using the word us, casually, naturally, as though it had always been there. "I was thinking about what us would look like," she said once during a long evening call. "Living somewhere near the water, somewhere warm." "You've worked hard enough, Dale. You deserve warm." I had never told anyone I wanted warmth. I had barely admitted it to myself. She described a small house, a garden, morning coffee with the sound of the ocean. She described it the way someone describes a memory rather than a dream specific, sensory, already half real. And I sat in my rented Boise house with the television on mute and Rusty asleep on my feet, and I thought, what if that is actually possible? What I could not see was that this was not a conversation. It was a construction site. Every exchange, every late-night call, every voice note was a beam being laid, a wall being built, not a home, a trap, assembled with the patience and precision of people who had done it many times before. To men in houses very much like mine, it began, as it always does, with these operations, with something reasonable, something that carried just enough plausibility to pass through a careful man's defenses. Angel's mother was ill. Dengue fever, she said, and dengue fever is genuinely common in Manila, genuinely dangerous, genuinely frightening for families without reliable health care. She didn't ask me directly. She mentioned it the way she mentioned everything difficult, softly, reluctantly, with the clear suggestion that she was telling me because I was her person now, not because she expected anything from it. Her mother needed to be admitted to the hospital. The hospital required a cash deposit before they would process the admission. The amount was $900. I sent it within the hour, via Western Union, to a name I had been given, to an address in Manila I had never seen. I didn't hesitate. I want to be honest about that. I didn't sit down and weigh the decision or consult anyone or sleep on it. I just did it. Because the woman I loved was frightened for her mother, and I had the money. And being needed felt like being real. The voice note she sent when the transfer was confirmed is something I will not forget for as long as I live. She was crying, not performed. Theatrical, crying quiet. Overwhelmed, sobbing. The kind that sounds like someone trying very hard to hold themselves together. "You saved her life, Dale. You are our angel now." I played it 3 times. I felt useful in a way that had nothing to do with fixing machinery or counting inventory. I felt like the kind of man I had always quietly wanted to be and never known how to become. What I did not know, what no victim ever knows in this moment, is that the first transfer is not the point. The first transfer is the proof of concept. It answers the question the scammers most need answered. Will he send? Once that answer is yes, the architecture shifts. The relationship doesn't stop being warm and intimate. It becomes warmer and more intimate, because warmth and intimacy are the mechanism, the reward system that keeps the target engaged. But underneath that warmth, a calculation has been made. Dale will send. Dale feels responsible. Dale needs to be needed. Dale can be managed. The requests that followed came carefully spaced, never so frequent as to feel like a pattern. Her motorbike broke down, she couldn't get to work without it, and she couldn't afford to lose her job. $350. A laptop for a new job application that would improve their future together. $480. Her younger sister's tuition, just 1 semester, just enough to keep her from dropping out. $700. Each amount was calibrated. Not so large as to trigger alarm. Not so small as to feel token. Each was accompanied by reluctance, gratitude, the particular emotional texture of someone who hated needing help but had no other choice. And after each transfer, The relationship deepened. She was more affectionate, more intimate, more detailed in her descriptions of the future she imagined for us. I kept a rough tally in my head. By month 5, I had sent approximately $7,000. I thought about that number sometimes, usually late at night, and I would feel a flicker of something not quite doubt, but adjacence to it. Then she would send a voice note of herself humming while she cooked, something small and domestic and real sounding, and the flicker would go out. Terry at the hardware store asked me once how things were going with my online friend. I told him things were going well. He nodded slowly and said, "Just be careful, Dale." I told him I knew what I was doing. I said it with the confidence of a man who absolutely did not know what he was doing. In the 6th month, Angel told me she wanted to come to Boise. The announcement arrived like something I had been waiting for without knowing it. She said she had been saving, that she wanted more than anything to stand in front of me in person, to see Rusty, to sit in my kitchen and drink coffee and stop living in a screen. She said she had found a flight, a reasonable one, with a connection through Tokyo. The total cost was $1,600. I told her I would cover it. She protested. She said she didn't want to be a woman who couldn't contribute, that it mattered to her to pay her own way. I insisted. She accepted with the kind of gratitude that felt like love made audible. 2 weeks later, there was a problem with her passport, a documentation issue with the Bureau of Immigration, something about her records being incomplete from a previous domestic travel registration. The processing fee to resolve it and issue a cleared travel document was $1,600. Looking back now, I can see the elegance of it. The flight money and the processing fee were the same amount, not because that was the actual cost of anything, but because it was a number that had already cleared my threshold once. I had already decided it was acceptable. I had already moved that amount in my mind from significant to manageable. The repetition was not coincidence. It was design. I sent the processing fee. Angel cried again. She said the delay was killing her, that all she wanted was to be with me, that she felt the distance between us like a physical ache. She began talking about what she would cook when she arrived. She asked if Rusty would like her. She said she was going to make up for every hard thing I had been through. The visit never happened. There was always another administrative delay, another document, another fee. But by the time I fully registered that the visit was never going to happen, I had crossed into territory where the financial losses already felt too large to abandon. A psychological threshold had been passed that the scammers understood, and I did not. At a certain point, a victim's reluctance to admit they have been fooled becomes a more powerful force than their reluctance to keep sending money. Sunk cost is not just an economic principle. In the context of manufactured love, it is a weapon. The most important moment in the entire operation, the pivot point that would determine whether I crossed from victim to catastrophic victim, came in the 8th month, and it arrived not as a demand, but as a goodbye. Angel became quiet. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but gradually the way weather changes before a storm. The pressure dropping so slowly you don't notice until you're already cold. Her messages came later. They were shorter. When I asked if something was wrong, she hesitated before answering. And hesitation from Angel was something I had never experienced in 8 months of daily contact. Finally, during a call that I can still replay with nauseating precision, she told me what she had been holding back. She said she had been thinking a great deal. She said she cared about me more than she had ever cared about anyone. And because of that, she felt it was wrong to continue. She said, "Dale, you deserve a real woman. Someone you can actually touch. Someone whose hand you can hold when things are hard. I don't know what I'm giving you except pain and distance and more waiting. Maybe I'm being selfish keeping you here." I felt the floor drop out from under me. She wasn't asking for anything. She wasn't threatening. She was releasing me. And the agony of being released by the only person who had made me feel wanted in 2 decades was so acute that I would have done anything to stop it. This moment had been engineered. Marisol had been coached on exactly when and how to deploy this tactic by 8 Chris, who had used it dozens of times before. The manufactured withdrawal is arguably the most sophisticated tool in the romance scammer's playbook because it turns the victim's own emotional investment into the mechanism of their destruction. You don't push the target off the cliff. You step back from them at the edge and wait for them to jump. I told Angel not to say that. I told her she was real to me, more real than most things I could touch. I told her I had been thinking about the future, about the Philippines, about moving, about what a life together might actually look like. I told her I was serious. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "If you were here, if you were actually here, in Manila, looking at me, I think I would know if this is real. I think we would both know." I booked the flight 4 days later. I told no one until the ticket was already purchased. What a man will do when he believes he is saving something he loves is not rational. It cannot be evaluated through the lens of financial prudence or risk assessment, or the advice of people who are watching from the outside. It operates at a level beneath reason, in the register of the body, the gut, the part of a person that has been lonely for so long it has become structural. I liquidated my savings account. I sold my truck, a 12-year-old Ford I had kept in good condition, because I took care of things I owned for $7,500 through an online listing. I took out a loan of $4,000 through the credit union where I had banked for 11 years. The woman at the loan desk asked me what the money was for. I told her home repairs. She processed the loan without further question. The total I had available after the flight booking was enough to start a life. That was how I thought about it. Not as my life savings, but as capital. Startup funds. The seed money of a second life that was finally going to mean something. I bought a ring, a simple silver band from a pawn shop on the north side of Boise. It cost $42. I practiced what I was going to say. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, a 61-year-old man in a rented house, and I rehearsed a proposal to a woman I had never met in person, in a language that was not hers, for a life we had built entirely in the space between two phone screens. The night before I left, I rehomed Rusty. My neighbor Carol had always liked him, and I asked if she would take him while I was gone. I told her I was going to the Philippines for a couple of weeks to visit a friend. She said yes, without asking too many questions. I drove to the airport the following morning in a borrowed car. I had a ring in my carry-on, a suitcase with enough clothes for a permanent move, and a heart full of something I can only describe as terrifying joy. The terror and the joy were inseparable. They lived in the same breath. I did not tell my sons. I did not tell Terry. I did not tell anyone who might have asked the right question at the right moment and interrupted the momentum of my own destruction. I was 61 years old, and I was finally going to live. The heat of Manila hits you before the airport doors have fully opened. It is not the clean, dry heat of an Idaho summer, but something denser. More inhabited air that has already passed through a million other lungs, and carries with it the smell of exhaust and food carts, and the particular ferrous undertone of a tropical city running at full volume. I came through the arrivals gate at Ninoy Aquino International Airport on a Tuesday morning, pulling a suitcase I had barely slept through a 16-hour journey to pack properly. Scanning the crowd with the kind of focus I hadn't felt in years. She had promised to be there with a sign bearing my name. She had described exactly what she would be. Wearing a yellow blouse, she said she was buying specially for the occasion. The crowd was thick and loud and warm in every sense. Families reuniting, drivers holding up corporate placards, children running. I walked the length of the arrivals barrier twice, then a third time. Then I found a spot near a pillar where I could see the full width of the exit corridor, and I stood there for 3 hours. She was not there. I told myself traffic. Manila's traffic was legendary. I had read about it during my research, had seen videos of the gridlock that could add hours to a journey. I told myself she was on her way. I checked my phone every 4 minutes. Her Facebook page, 8 months of conversations, voice notes, late-night calls. A relationship that had cost me everything was gone. Not inactive, gone. Deleted entirely, as though it had never existed. Her phone number connected to a recorded message in Filipino. I didn't speak Filipino. I didn't know what the recording said. I stood in the arrivals hall of a foreign airport in 34-degree heat and called the number 11 times. Angel had arranged, she told me weeks earlier, a surprise, a hotel in Ermita, a thoughtful, generous gesture, she said, her way of welcoming me to her country. I took a taxi to the address she had given me. The driver didn't speak much English, but he knew the area. We moved through traffic that was exactly as described, a dense, honking, miraculously functional chaos that under different circumstances I might have found fascinating. The hotel had no reservation under my name. The desk clerk checked twice, then a third time. with the careful patience of someone dealing with a distressed foreign visitor. There was no record of Angel Reyes. There was no reservation. There was no surprise. I sat on a concrete bench outside the hotel, with my suitcase between my knees and the ring in my carry-on bag, and the city of Manila going about its enormous, indifferent life around me. The heat was absolute. A motorbike backfired somewhere nearby. A vendor pushed a cart of sliced fruit past me, calling out in a language I didn't understand. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough that a man noticed me. His name was Efren. He was a retired schoolteacher in his late 60s, small and unhurried, who had been buying a newspaper from a stand nearby. He sat down beside me, without asking permission, in the way that certain people understand, without being told, when sitting beside someone is the right thing to do. He asked if I was all right. He asked it simply, without alarm, as though he had time for the answer. I told him everything. Not strategically, not with any particular sequence or sense, just everything, in whatever order it came out. Angel, the months of talking, the money, the ring, the truck I had sold, the dog I had left behind, the flight I had taken toward a woman who was not at the airport. Efren listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Let me take you somewhere to eat. Then we will figure out what to do next." He bought me a meal at a nearby eatery, rice, and something I couldn't identify, but which was warm and good, and he helped me find the contact information for the Philippine National Police Anti-Cybercrime Group. He sat with me while I filed a report. He wrote down the address of a budget hotel where I could stay for a reasonable rate. He did not know me. He owed me nothing. He was simply a man who had noticed another man in trouble and had decided not to walk past. The report was filed. No arrest was ever made. I did not go home immediately. I don't know exactly why. Partly because the flight home was not for another week, and changing it would have cost more money than I had left in my pocket. Partly because I had nowhere in particular to return to. Partly, and this is the hardest thing to admit, because I needed a container for what had happened. I needed walls around it before I could carry it. I found a small, clean hotel in a quieter part of Ermita, and I stayed there for 11 days. I ate at local restaurants where nobody spoke much English and where I could sit in the ambient noise of other people's ordinary lives and feel, if not safe, at least invisible. I visited Intramuros one afternoon, the old walled city, centuries of stone and history in the middle of the modern metropolis, and I walked through it alone, reading plaques without fully absorbing them, watching tourists take photographs, sitting on a bench in the shade of an old wall and thinking about nothing and everything simultaneously. The grief was strange. It didn't feel like the grief of a scam victim, if such a thing has a recognizable texture. It felt like the grief of a breakup, which is its own particular obscenity, because there was nothing to break up. There had never been a relationship. There had been a performance, executed against me with professional precision, and my grief was not for a person, but for the version of myself who had believed the performance was real, who had needed it to be real badly enough to sell his truck and board a flight and practice a proposal in a bathroom mirror. I thought about Rusty, sleeping in Carol's house, wondering where I had gone. That thought undid me more than once. I called no one from Manila. I had no words yet for what had happened, and the thought of constructing them over an international connection in the echoing tiled bathroom of a budget hotel was more than I could face. I sent Terry a text message that said, "Trip going okay, back soon." He replied with the thumbs up emoji. I stared at it for a long time. On the 9th day, I went back to the anti-cybercrime group to follow up on the report. A young officer with careful English explained gently but clearly that the case profile, fake social media identity, offshore remittance, no local suspects identified was one they saw frequently. The operation I had been targeted by was likely run by multiple individuals simultaneously managing numerous victims. The profile of the woman I knew as Angel Reyes had almost certainly already been reconstructed under a different name and was being deployed against someone else at this very moment. I thanked him and walked back out into the heat. On the 11th day, I took a taxi to the airport, checked my single suitcase, and boarded a flight back to Boise. Somewhere in my carry-on, still in the small fabric pouch where I had placed it, was a $42 silver ring from a pawn shop on the north side of town. I did not take it out again for the entire journey home. Boise in November is gray and cold, and familiar in the way that only a place you have lived in for decades can be familiar, not comforting exactly, but known. I recognized everything from the cab window. The gas stations, the chain restaurants, the particular flat light of a western city at the end of autumn. It all looked slightly unreal, the way things look when you've been somewhere that operated by different rules. I returned to a house that was exactly as I had left it, minus the dog. The food bowl was still by the door. The leash was still on the hook. Carol had asked if I wanted her to clear those things away before I came home. I told her no. I sat in the house for 2 days without telling anyone what had happened. I went to the hardware store on the third day, punched in at exactly the same time as always, worked my shift, exchanged the same number of words with Terry as I normally would. He looked at me once with a searching expression that asked a question his mouth didn't form. I looked back at him steadily and he let it go. I didn't tell my sons for 4 months. Not because I didn't think they deserved to know, but because the shape of it, the scope of what I had allowed to happen, was something I could not yet put into language without feeling that the words would break something structural inside me. I had spent 61 years being the man who didn't need help, who didn't fall apart, who fixed things, rather than becoming a thing that needed fixing. The financial damage was total and irreversible. $25,410 between the remittances, the flights, the Manila expenses, and the credit union loan that still needed to be repaid from a part-time hardware store salary. My savings were gone. My truck was gone. The retirement I had imagined, modest, quiet. Somewhere warm was gone with them. The credit union loan was the cruelest part in some ways. It was a tangible monthly reminder, a number on a statement, an obligation I had created in service of a lie. 11 years of responsible banking, 11 years of always paying on time, and now the money borrowed was simply gone, wired to a system that had processed it and distributed it and left no traceable remainder. What surprised me was the shame. Not about the money, or not only about the money, but about the wanting. About having wanted connection badly enough to override every caution, every instinct, every quiet alarm. There is a specific kind of shame that attaches to need to the exposure of having needed something deeply and having had that need exploited. It is different from the shame of making a financial error. It reaches deeper, into the places you don't let people see. I began attending a support group for romance fraud victims. I found it at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, as one finds most things that actually help, through a desperate and sleepless search that had no particular destination. It was an online group, which carried its own irony, returning to the internet to heal from what the internet had done. But the people in that group spoke in a language I recognized immediately. Not the language of financial loss, though that was present, but the language of the particular shame that lives underneath it. One man had lost his entire pension. Another had taken out a second mortgage. A woman had sent nearly $100,000 over 3 years before she found the group, and every one of them described the same experience. Not stupidity, but a hunger that had been found and mapped and systematically fed until it consumed everything around it. I wrote something in the group forum one night that I want to repeat here, because it is the truest thing I found myself able to say about what happened to me. I wasn't stupid. I was just alone. And she spoke to that like she had a key to a door nobody else had ever knocked on. Dale Hutchkins is 62 years old now. He still works at the hardware store. He repaid the credit union loan in 14 months, cutting every non-essential from a life that did not have many non-essentials to begin with. He has not rebuilt his savings at 62, on the salary of a part-time hardware clerk. The mathematics of that are not generous, but he has stabilized. The freefall has stopped. He got Rusty back. Carol returned him without ceremony or judgment, handing over the leash and a bag of food, and saying only, "He'll be glad to be home." He was. His relationship with his sons is cautious and ongoing. He called them both in the spring, 4 months after returning from Manila, and told them what had happened in the plainest language he could manage. The older one, Kevin, was angry, not cruelly but protectively. The anger of a son who cannot understand why his father didn't ask for help, didn't pick up the phone, didn't let anyone in. The younger one, Ray, was quiet for a long time and then said, "Dad, I didn't know you were that lonely." Dale said nothing to that. There was nothing to say that wasn't both true and enormous. The silver ring went into a kitchen drawer sometime in January. Dale doesn't know exactly when. He noticed one day that it was there and he left it where it was. The woman he knew as Angel Reyes has never been identified or charged. The operation she worked for run from an apartment in Tondo by a woman the neighborhood knew as 8 Chris continued to function after Dale's case was reported. This is not exceptional. It is, in fact, standard. Romance scam operations are low-risk, high-yield criminal enterprises. The victims are geographically distant. The transactions are processed through legitimate remittance channels. The digital profiles can be deleted and reconstructed in hours. The young officer at the anti-cybercrime group was not wrong when he said the profile was likely already in use under a new name. Somewhere right now, a man very much like Dale is receiving a friend request from a young woman with a warm smile and a naturally posed photo. She is asking him about his country, his work, his life. She is making him feel interesting. She is going to ask about his dog by name. She is going to call him something small and affectionate that nobody has called him in years. And she is going to find, if she has chosen correctly, the door that nobody else has ever knocked on. The best protection against romance fraud is not cynicism. Cynicism is too blunt an instrument. It closes off too much, costs too much, demands that you distrust everything in order to avoid trusting the wrong thing. The best protection is literacy, understanding the pattern, knowing that if an online relationship has never resulted in a verifiable, in-person meeting, it cannot be the basis for financial sacrifice. Knowing that real emergencies, real ones, involving real people who love you, do not require wire transfers to strangers in foreign cities. Knowing that manufactured withdrawal, the sudden threat of loss, the "you deserve someone real" speech, is the oldest lever in this particular machine and the most effective. Dale knows all of this now. He knows it in the way you know things that have been purchased with everything you had. He is not bitter. Bitterness requires a specific relationship with the past, a refusal to accept what happened, and Dale has, with considerable effort, accepted it. He made decisions. Those decisions had consequences. The system that exploited him is a criminal one, and the moral weight belongs to the people who ran it, not to a man in Idaho who simply wanted to feel like someone was glad he existed. But he wants you to know the cost. He wants the number $25,410, plus a truck, plus a savings account, plus the quiet dream of a life somewhere warm to exist, somewhere outside his own head, useful to someone who has not yet paid it. He wants you, if you are reading this and feeling the particular pull of an online relationship that has never crossed into the verifiable physical world, to stop. Not to stop wanting connection. You cannot stop wanting what you genuinely need. But to stop and ask, can I verify this? Can I see this person's life through means other than what they have chosen to show me? Has this relationship ever cost them anything, or only ever cost me? Those 3 questions, asked honestly, are worth more than Dale Hutchins' truck and savings account and $42 ring combined. He is back in his house in Boise. Rusty sleeps by the door again. The television is on in the evenings, the same as before. But something has shifted, not catastrophically, not permanently, but genuinely. He speaks at the online support group most Tuesday nights. He has helped 3 men recognize the pattern before it consumed them. He does not know their names or their faces, but he knows they stopped sending money, and that is sufficient. It is not the warm life by the ocean that was promised to him, but it is real. And Dale Hutchins, who learned the hard way what the distance between those 2 things actually costs, will take real every time. If this story reached you, if it made you pause, or think, or pick up the phone to call someone you haven't spoken to in too long, please consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. These stories exist because people like Dale were brave enough to let their worst moments become someone else's warning. That courage deserves to be heard.